So you've surely seen drone footage from Ukraine by now, looking more like a video game than a real war. But the people behind that footage have become responsible for about 80% of all casualties on the battlefield. And logically, they became pretty much hated by both sides. But the real reason isn't because they're effective, but something that drone operators themselves began doing that earned them arguably the most hated reputation a soldier, if you can even call them that, could get. So when a drone operator actually gets captured alive, chances are he's not getting the usual Geneva Convention treatment. Now, to understand how all of this happened, let's get back to where everything started. The idea of unmanned aircraft is actually older than most people think. Being able to cause destruction to your enemy without risking your own soldiers' lives, that's something every army in history has dreamed about. The concept might go back as far as the 10th century, when a princess got revenge for her husband's murder by tying burning cloth to birds' legs and letting them fly back, which ended up burning down an entire city. In 1849, in Venice, the Austrians tried launching balloons loaded with bombs, but it didn't really work out because they had no way to control them, so the wind would often blow the balloons in the wrong direction. And over time, new technologies were becoming available, things like gyroscopes for stability and basic autopilot systems. Meanwhile, the huge casualties in wars were making military leaders desperate to find ways to reduce losses. The term drone actually comes from the 1930s, when the British military's Queen Bee target aircraft became so well known that its distinctive buzzing sound gave these unmanned planes their nickname. So the Cold War is really where drones started becoming useful. After the Soviets shot down CIA pilot Gary Powers in his U-2 in 1960, it became clear that manned spy flights carried huge political risk the moment they failed. But an unmanned aircraft crashing over hostile territory, that's a whole different story. There's no pilot to capture, no one to put on trial, and it's a lot easier to deny the whole thing ever happened. The math was pretty simple. Send a drone, and the worst case scenario is you lose a machine. So the Americans got very interested in aircraft that didn't have pilots to capture. The first real operational drone was the Model 147 Lightning Bug, which flew over 3,000 missions, mostly over Vietnam. It was launched from larger aircraft, and after it flew its routes, it got snatched out of the air by helicopters on the way back. But these were still just flying cameras. They couldn't loiter, couldn't respond to what they saw in real time, and they definitely couldn't shoot back. They were used mostly for spying, not for fighting. The real shift came from Israel, and honestly, it came out of pure desperation. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israel lost 50 planes in just 3 days, all shot down by Egyptian and Syrian missiles. That's a brutal number. So they started thinking, why not build cheap, throwaway aircraft that could do the risky stuff without putting any pilots in danger? That's exactly how they ended up with the Tadiran Mastiff. Basically, the first drone that could stream live video back to you while it was flying. You could actually watch what it was seeing in real time. It could stay up in the air for 7 hours, just cruising over the battlefield and sending back non-stop footage. When you think about it, that's pretty wild for the time. And that one thing, being able to see what the drone saw as it happened, completely changed how these things could actually be used. Then came the operation that showed the world what was possible. In 1982, Israel needed to take out Syria's Soviet-built air defense system in Lebanon, and what they pulled off was remarkable. First, they sent drones in waves. Some were there to scout, mapping out exactly where all the missile sites were. But some of them weren't even real threats. They were just there to trick Syrian radar into thinking a huge wave of jets was coming. The Syrians panicked, thinking they were under a massive assault, so they did exactly what Israel wanted. They switched on all their radars and started blasting missiles at the decoys. In doing so, they burned through their ammunition and, more importantly, gave away the exact location of every single one of their defenses. That's when the real jets showed up. With the Syrian defenses essentially blind, confused, and out of ammo, Israeli aircraft wiped out 29 out of 30 missile batteries in roughly 2 hours. Over 80 Syrian planes were shot down. Israeli losses, 0. It was the first time the world got a clear look at what drones could really do when used as part of a bigger strategy. Not just as a gadget, but as a way to completely outsmart an enemy before the real fight even started. Every military in the world studied this operation and got the message loud and clear. Drones weren't just scouts anymore. They made everything else you had more effective. But nobody could have guessed where this was all heading, or what would eventually happen to the people operating them. So the next big leap came in the 1990s when the Americans started putting weapons on drones. The MQ-1 Predator started as a reconnaissance platform, but after the CIA allegedly spotted what was probably Osama bin Laden at a hideout in Afghanistan and couldn't do anything about it, the push came to arm these things. Then, September 11th happened, and the debate was over. Armed predators were flying combat missions over Afghanistan, and the drone had officially become something much more than a scout. And this created something the world had never seen before. You could keep track of a target for hours, confirm identification, and then kill them with a missile, all while sitting at a control station on the other side of the planet. American operators based in Nevada flew drones over Pakistan and Yemen. What started as a tool for taking pictures without risking pilots had become a way to kill people without putting a single one of your own soldiers in danger. Thousands of strikes, thousands of deaths. The drones kept getting bigger and more capable over time. The MQ-9 Reaper, for example, could carry over a ton of weapons and stay in the air for more than 24 hours straight. But these were expensive, sophisticated machines. A Predator drone cost about $4 million. A Reaper, around $30 million. On top of that, you needed satellite links, trained crews, and a whole support infrastructure to keep it all running. This wasn't the kind of thing just anyone could afford. Only the wealthiest nations in the world had this kind of capability. Then came the war that should have been a wake-up call for everyone. In September of 2020, Azerbaijan attacked Armenian forces in Nagorno-Karabakh. The Armenians had a conventional military, tanks, artillery, and Soviet-era air defenses. The Azerbaijanis, on the other hand, had Turkish TB2 Bayraktar drones, somewhere between $2 and $5 million each, and Israeli loitering munitions like the Harop. Basically, drones that fly around waiting for a target and then crash into it, which ran about $1 million apiece. Cheaper, smaller, and unmanned, but as it turned out, brutally effective against a military that never saw it coming. Over 44 days, Azerbaijan systematically picked apart Armenian armor and air defenses one by one. The videos that came out showed thermal footage of Armenian soldiers going about their business, completely unaware, seconds before the explosion hit. Ukraine was watching all of this very closely. In fact, they had been the first country to ever buy the TB2, picking up 6 drones back in 2019. When Russia annexed Crimea and the war in Donbass began in 2014, both sides started using commercial drones for reconnaissance. Nothing high-tech, just off-the-shelf quadcopters spotting for artillery. The Russians used them to pinpoint Ukrainian positions and then directed artillery strikes right onto them. The Ukrainians learned quickly just how dangerous it was to be spotted from above, but at this point, it was still small-scale, improvised, almost experimental on both sides. By February 2022, Ukraine had about 20 TB2 Bayraktars. Russia had its own reconnaissance drones and the Orlan-10, a small surveillance platform. What nobody saw coming was what would happen once the expensive military drones stopped working and soldiers needed to start improvising with $400 racing drones from hobby shops. At first, the TB2s were having a field day, destroying Russian convoys, taking out Buk air defense systems, and picking off supply trucks. The footage spread across the internet almost overnight. A Ukrainian soldier wrote a song called Bayraktar on the very first day of the invasion, and it became a genuine folk phenomenon with millions of views. But here's what most people missed while they were singing along. The TB2 has some pretty serious design limitations. It flies at about 70 knots, roughly the speed of a small propeller plane, at altitudes of 16 to 18,000 feet. Against Armenian forces with outdated air defenses and next to no electronic warfare capability, that's fine. Against Russia, it was a completely different situation. By summer of 2022, the Bayraktar TB2 was largely neutralized. Russia tightened up its layered air defenses, rolled out electronic jamming equipment, and started hunting the drones down methodically. The era of the Turkish Wonder drone was over. And what came next? That's where it gets interesting, because what replaced it was something nobody planned for. With the TB2 sidelined, Ukrainian soldiers, particularly territorial defense units, started improvising. They took DJI Mavic quadcopters, the same consumer drones that hobbyists use for aerial photography, and started weaponizing them. The earliest attempts involved dropping Molotov cocktails. Though crude, it proved the concept worked. Then came the first successful grenade drops. Videos started surfacing showing a Mavic releasing a munition from about 100 meters up with surprisingly accurate results. Soldiers developed 3D printed bomb release mechanisms using light sensor triggers to set them off. They also adapted VOG grenades, originally built for underbarrel grenade launchers, to be dropped straight from these consumer drones. All of a sudden, a $2,000 DJI Mavic 3 could put an explosive through an open tank hatch. But the real shift came from a completely unexpected community: racing drone hobbyists. FPV stands for first-person view. Before the war, FPV drones were essentially toys for enthusiasts who strapped on VR-style goggles and raced small, agile quadcopters through obstacle courses at high speed, just for the thrill of it. Over time, these pilots had developed remarkable reflexes and a sharp sense of spatial awareness. The drones were built for one thing only: raw speed and durability, nothing else. Not surveillance, not combat, just fast, small, and cheap. So what exactly goes into one of these things? As it turns out, not much. A basic FPV kamikaze drone runs somewhere between $300 and $700 to build, which is less than most people spend on a laptop. You've got a carbon fiber frame, 4 electric motors, a flight controller, a radio receiver, a camera, and a video transmitter. Then you strap an explosive to it, and you're done. Most soldiers go with the RPG-7 warhead, but RKG-3 anti-tank grenades, fragmentation rounds, and thermobaric charges are all on the menu too. And more by the day, custom-made munitions designed specifically for drone delivery are showing up on the battlefield as well. As it became impossible to ignore just how effective these drones were, production ramped up dramatically. By the end of 2024, Ukraine was churning out approximately 200,000 FPV drones every single month. And while Ukraine was the one who pioneered the weaponization of FPV drones, Russia was not far behind. Now stop and think about this for a second, because the numbers are almost hard to believe. Russia spends somewhere between $1 and $2 million on a single T-72 tank, and it takes months to build one. Their most advanced operational tank, the T-90M, runs around $4 million. A Tor air defense system, $25 million. And yet in November of 2023, Ukrainian soldiers destroyed one of those $25 million machines with a drone that was donated by civilians, a piece of hardware that cost less than a decent laptop. The math simply doesn't add up anymore, and that's exactly the point. When your weapon costs $400 and your target costs $2 million, you can afford to miss a lot. Ukrainian commanders reported that even their best FPV units were only hitting their mark 20 to 50% of the time against armored vehicles. That sounds pretty bad until you actually run the numbers. Say you need 10 drones to take out one tank. That's $4,000 worth of drones, destroying $2 million worth of equipment. The exchange ratio works out to 500 to 1. But drones weren't only destroying equipment. By late 2024, they were responsible for an estimated 70 to 80% of all casualties on both sides. The front lines froze in place, with both sides grinding each other down in a war of attrition that neither could win outright. Many analysts started reaching for a familiar comparison. World War I with drones. The same static trenches, the same relentless casualties, the same sense of being completely exposed with nowhere to run. Only now, the killing zone stretches deeper and hits harder than anything the soldiers of 1916 could have ever imagined. We'll get to what all of this means for the soldiers living through it. But first, let's talk about the full range of drones that made this possible. Because if you think the FPV kamikaze is the whole story, you haven't seen anything yet. That's just the beginning. By 2023, both sides were running a complex ecosystem of unmanned systems, each one filling a different role on the battlefield. Reconnaissance quadcopters became standard issue at every level. A typical infantry squad now goes into the field with a DJI Mavic or something similar, giving them constant eyes in the sky. These drones spot enemy positions, help adjust artillery fire in real time, and keep tabs on troop movements around the clock. For centuries, military doctrine assumed you could hide troop concentrations and move around without the enemy knowing. That assumption is dead. The battlefield has become completely transparent. If you move, someone sees it. And then there are the grenade-dropping drones. These things hover directly over trenches and foxholes and drop small munitions straight down onto whoever is sitting below. A soldier in a trench who thinks he's safe from artillery can still be killed by a drone dropping a grenade right on top of his head. The cover that had protected soldiers for over a century of warfare suddenly stopped working overnight. Then there are the heavy-lift bomber drones. Russian soldiers had a name for them: Baba Yaga, the witch from Slavic folklore who swoops through the darkness. It's hard to think of a more fitting name. These things operate at night. The most common Ukrainian variant is the R-18. a large hexacopter that can haul up to 5 kilograms of explosives, mortar shells, RPG warheads, whatever gets the job done. It can be operated from several kilometers behind the front line without ever putting a pilot at risk. Newer versions tap into Starlink satellite internet, which pushes their reach out to over 20 kilometers. They fly multiple bombing runs every single night, circling quietly overhead while soldiers on the ground hold their breath. And then there are the ones coming from outside Ukraine altogether. Iran supplied Russia with Shahed 136 kamikaze drones. Think of them as cruise missiles with wings. They carry a warhead of about 40 kilograms and can travel up to 2,000 kilometers before hitting their target. They're slow, loud, and not particularly accurate on their own, but that's kind of the point. They're cheap enough to launch in massive swarms, and when you send enough of them at once, even the best air defenses can get overwhelmed by sheer numbers. At sea, Ukraine did something nobody had done before. They invented an entirely new category of weapon. Sea Baby is an unmanned surface vessel about 6 meters long, stuffed with up to 2,000 kilograms of explosives, and capable of tearing across the water at 90 kilometers per hour with a range of roughly 1,000 kilometers. Basically, a giant floating bomb that drives itself. In August of 2023, Ukraine stood up the world's first dedicated explosive naval drone unit, and they sank several Russian ships, reaching targets deep inside waters that Russia considered completely safe. The Black Sea suddenly wasn't so safe anymore. So what happens when drones become the dominant force on the battlefield? Both sides entered an intense technological arms race, and it wasn't to build better drones, but to stop them. And how do you actually stop a drone? One way is to cut it off from the person flying it. That's exactly what jamming systems do. They overpower or disrupt the radio link between the drone operator and the aircraft. And once that signal is gone, the drone is on its own. It either crashes, drifts uselessly, or returns to a preset location. Russia went all in on this, deploying jammers on vehicles in backpack-sized units for squad use, and eventually shrinking them down to pocket-sized personal devices that individual soldiers could carry at all times. Ukraine developed its own countermeasures, including something called the Enclave Network, a system that throws up protective jamming domes over defensive positions, essentially putting a roof over your head that drones can't get through. By late 2024, somewhere between 50 and 75% of all radio-controlled drones were being successfully jammed before they ever reached their targets. The drones were still devastating when they got through, but the majority were now failing to connect. So this led to the next evolution: drones that didn't need a radio signal at all. Russia figured this one out in spring of 2024 with fiber optic drones. The idea is actually pretty old. They basically borrowed it from wire-guided torpedoes. Instead of beaming control signals through the air where they can be jammed, the drone just unspools a hair-thin fiber optic cable behind it as it flies. The operator's commands travel down that cable as pulses of light. The drone's video feed comes back the exact same way. No radio, nothing to jam, nothing to mess with, just light moving down a wire. A fiber optic drone is completely immune to electronic jamming. There's no radio signal to disrupt, and it emits no electromagnetic signature whatsoever, meaning direction-finding equipment can't even locate the operator. The cable can unspool to 10 or even 20+ kilometers, allowing strikes deep behind enemy lines. Sure, the drones are heavier and less maneuverable, and the cable can snag on obstacles. But in a battlefield absolutely saturated with electronic warfare, the immunity to jamming overwhelmingly outweighs those drawbacks. Russia deployed them first, and Ukraine scrambled to develop its own versions, fielding them in significant numbers by early 2025. The Ukrainians fought back with some pretty creative countermeasures, rotating barbed wire barriers powered by battery-driven motors that spin continuously, designed specifically to cut trailing cables, fishing nets and steel mesh stretched across supply routes, and when possible, soldiers physically traced discarded cables back to operator positions and called in strikes. The adaptation cycle never stops. One of the more unsettling innovations is something called the Zhdun tactic, a drone ambush. A fiber optic FPV drone is flown to a position near a road or supply route and then simply landed and left there. Because of the fiber optic cable, it emits zero radio signal, making it completely invisible to electronic detection. The drone drops into a low-power standby mode and waits. Minutes, hours, sometimes up to a full day. When a vehicle finally passes by, the operator reactivates the drone and launches a surprise attack at point-blank range. The target gets virtually no warning at all. AI offered yet another answer to the jamming problem, and this one is pretty straightforward to understand. An operator identifies a target using the drone's camera feed and locks on. The drone's onboard AI then memorizes the target's visual outline using machine vision, basically pattern recognition. From that point on, the drone can fly itself all the way to the target without any radio connection whatsoever. Even if jamming cuts the signal completely in the last few hundred meters, the drone just keeps going, navigating by vision alone. This is sometimes called last-mile autonomy, meaning the drone handles that final stretch on its own. It made for a 3 to 4 times higher hit rate, and suddenly the jamming advantage was gone all over again. Now, physical defenses evolved alongside the technology. Cope cages showed up early, originally as protection against top-attack missiles like the Javelin, which are designed to strike a tank's thin roof armor. As FPV drone attacks picked up, the cages evolved into something far more extreme. Some vehicles ended up almost entirely enclosed in metal frameworks, covered with wire mesh. Then came the turtle tanks. Russian engineers completely enclosed T-72 tanks in sheet metal, creating something that looked like a mobile shed on tracks. Some crews went even further and added hundreds of thick metal spines on the outside, giving you what soldiers called porcupine tanks. These vehicles look ridiculous. The crew can barely see out. The turret can only turn a few degrees. But they have a specific job: leading assault columns through minefields and drone swarms, taking hits so that the vehicles behind them can keep moving forward. The simplest countermeasure turned out to be one of the oldest weapons around. Soldiers now routinely carry shotguns, specifically to take down low-flying drones. A pellet spread gives you far better odds of hitting a small, fast-moving target at close range than trying to line up a rifle shot. Both sides also developed interceptor drones with one job and one job only: hunting enemy drones out of the sky. Aerial dogfighting at miniature scale. And then there was one moment that stopped everyone in their tracks. A Ukrainian FPV drone managed to shoot down a Russian Mi-8 helicopter in mid-flight. That left a lot of people wondering just how far this technology might eventually go. Now, Operation Spiderweb. This one is worth slowing down for. Ukrainian intelligence operatives smuggled FPV drones deep into Russian territory and concealed them inside modified wooden containers built to look like ordinary mobile cabins, the kind that get hauled around on flatbed trucks across Russia every day without anyone giving them a second look. Nobody suspected a thing. Each container held approximately 36 small FPV drones called OSA, or WASP, quadcopters, each carrying a payload of just over 3 kilograms. 36 drones per box. The containers were loaded onto trucks and driven by unsuspecting civilian truck drivers to positions near 5 Russian air bases spread across the country. At the designated moment, the roofs of the containers were remotely opened and all the drones launched directly from inside. Each of the 117 drones had its own pilot operating from Ukraine. The drones also had partially automated AI capabilities built in. So, for example, if they lost signal, they could fall back on pre-planned routes and navigate autonomously. The pilots steered each drone toward the most vulnerable points on the parked aircraft, looking for fuel lines, engines, anything that would hurt. The strike hit Belaya Air Base in Siberia, over 4,300 kilometers from Ukraine. Let that distance sink in for a second. Ukrainian officials claimed over 40 Russian strategic aircraft were hit in the attack. Russian media had a name for it almost immediately. They called it Russia's Pearl Harbor. So now let's talk about the people actually flying these things. FPV operators typically work in small teams of 2 to 5 people, set up anywhere from 1 to several kilometers behind the front line. The setup is pretty simple. One person pilots the strike drone, while another operates a reconnaissance drone to find and track the target. But here's what makes this different from anything that came before. There's no distance, no abstraction, no looking at a map and calling in coordinates. These operators watch their targets through first-person video, up close and personal, all the way to impact. They see the explosion happen through their own goggles. Many of them are young, tech-savvy people, the kind who grew up playing video games, who became some of the most lethal combatants of the entire war while sitting in a bunker kilometers away from the actual fighting. For the soldiers on the receiving end, life has become permanent surveillance and permanent threat. The front lines have turned into what analysts call a drone line. That's a zone stretching 15 to 25 kilometers from the front, where the density of FPV drones from both sides is so overwhelming that any movement above ground is potentially a death sentence. This has forced soldiers to live and move underground as much as possible. When infantry do advance, they move in groups of 2 or 3 rather than full platoons, because a larger group is just a bigger target. Both sides have also turned to motorcycles, dirt bikes, and ATVs to get through the drone line, trading protection for speed in the hope that moving fast makes them harder to hit. Hitting a moving vehicle with an FPV drone or threading one through an open tank hatch is not something just anyone can do. The pilots who can pull that off consistently have months or even years of accumulated skill behind them. The drone itself costs a few $100s and can be replaced in a day. Training a competent FPV operator takes months, and there are no shortcuts. Both sides now recognize that killing an experienced drone pilot is more strategically valuable than destroying the drones themselves. Because drone operators are both valuable and deeply hated, both sides built entire systems dedicated to hunting them down. Russia put together a specialized unit called Rubicon, whose only job is targeting Ukrainian drone crews. According to some reports, they were inflicting 40 to 70% losses on drone positions within a week of showing up in a sector. The way it works is straightforward. Every time an operator communicates with their drone, they give off a radio signal. Rubicon's equipment picks up that signal, triangulates the position, and calls in a strike. Operators adapted fast. They stopped driving to their positions and started walking the last few kilometers on foot to avoid detection. Both sides built hardened shelters. The cat-and-mouse game never ends. But something else was happening on both sides of the war that went beyond just killing. Drone operators started turning their strikes into content. Videos of drone attacks were edited with mocking captions, meme overlays, sound effects, and music, then posted to Telegram channels that had accumulated tens of thousands of combat videos. The deaths of real soldiers were packaged and presented like highlight reels from a video game, often with sarcastic commentary ridiculing the people being killed. It didn't take long for this to become monetized, with channels selling videos that are just genuinely disturbing, the kind of content no normal person should ever have to see. All of it together, the mocking, the kill compilations, the leaderboards, created an intense and very specific kind of hatred toward drone operators that goes well beyond normal wartime hostility. Throughout military history, certain types of fighters have always been singled out for the worst treatment when captured. Snipers, flamethrower operators, spies. There's always been a category of soldier that the enemy reserves its deepest contempt for. But the hatred toward drone operators has reached a level that's hard to find a historical parallel for. They're seen as fighting in perhaps the most cowardly way imaginable. And that's before you factor in the mocking, the content, the treating of real deaths like entertainment. When you add all of that on top of the killing itself, you start to understand why captured drone operators don't tend to fare very well. So what actually happens when hunters are being hunted? The hatred doesn't stay abstract. It translates directly into what happens to them in those first moments after they're taken. The most well-documented case happened on October the 10th, 2024 in Russia's Kursk region, and it's not easy to describe. 9 Ukrainian drone operators found themselves surrounded by Russian forces near the village of Zeleny Shliak. They fought for as long as they could, until the ammunition ran out and there was simply nothing left to do but put their hands up. What happened next was captured on drone footage and later analyzed by the Ukrainian military. Russian forces disarmed them, made them strip down to their undergarments, lined them up face down on the ground, and then shot them. The footage was clear enough that one mother, somewhere back in Ukraine, watched the video and recognized her own son. And this wasn't a one-off incident, not even close. There are currently ongoing investigations into over 260 prisoner-of-war executions that have gone public, and drone operators are far from the only victims. But on the other end of the spectrum, drones also became a way for soldiers to survive. Not every encounter ended in violence. Some systems were developed specifically to allow soldiers to surrender to a drone. The drone would either drop them instructions on what to do next, or slowly guide them toward the lines where they could be taken into custody. A soldier who wanted out could walk toward a hovering quadcopter and let it lead him to captivity, killing and surrendering, both happening through a screen. This has become perhaps the most documented war in human history. Hand-to-hand combat, artillery strikes, executions, surrenders, all of it captured on video from multiple angles in real time. And what's even more unsettling is how normalized it has all become. We scroll past this footage on social media without stopping to think about what we're actually looking at, or what it's quietly doing to us. Nothing like this media environment has ever existed in any previous war. This is the first major conflict where mass-scale killing is documented from the killer's own point of view, uploaded in real time for anyone in the world to watch. What the drone sees, what the operator sees, and what you see sitting at home, scrolling through your phone, it's all identical. The footage looks and feels exactly like a video game. And that's not a coincidence. Operators actually train on commercial simulators that anyone can buy online. The line between war and entertainment has never been thinner, and most of us don't even notice it anymore.